Good evening. Welcome to Blood Ties and Bedside Tales, a mother daughter podcast where we talk about true crime, love stories, and the paranormal, as well as the mysterious. My name is May.
And I'm Karlyrose. Today, we're going to be kicking off the first episode of our podcast with three of my mom's personal experiences. Growing up, my mom had a lot of interesting stories, whether it was a ghost story, something just kind of mysterious and interesting that happened to her. I've always told her and always believed that my mom had a gift. And we thought no better way to kick off our podcast and allow everyone to get to know us than to share personal stories. So, hope you guys enjoy. And, Mommy, take it away.
Before we begin, hit that like button to help our channel grow. Consider subscribing and turn on all notifications so you don't ever miss an episode from us. So here it goes. The first story that we're going to delve into occurred when I was in the third grade. And the story goes, when I was in the third grade, we rented this house, and the house had 3 bedrooms. So if you can imagine standing in the hallway facing the first room, which would be the room in the center, to the left of that room was the master bedroom, which at the time was occupied by my older brother. And looking back at it now, it'll kind of make sense why my mom and my stepdad didn't occupy the master bedroom. It was my older brother. So my older brother occupied the master bedroom. My parents had the middle bedroom, and then to the right of my parents' bedroom was my bedroom. So when this happened, my older brother broke his arm. He was out playing. He fell off a tree, sprained his arm really bad, and so he was in pretty bad shape. In fact, my mom had asked me to sleep in his room, in case he needed anything, I would be the one to fetch it for him. Which of course I didn't mind because, he's my older brother and I was more than happy to do it. So, visualize walking into this room, you step through the door, to the left is the closet. It's not a big closet. It's not like those walk in closets. It's just big enough to hang your clothes. And then it had overhead space for storage. So as you look to the right in the bedroom, you look to your right at the top left corner of the bedroom. The bed was pushed against that corner, the top left corner. And it was a fairly big bed. I believe at the time it was a king size bed, 2 twin size beds put together. It was a really big bed. And so my brother was sleeping on one mattress and I was sleeping on the other mattress. One night we were both asleep and I remember my back was facing the door and my brother and I were fast asleep. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I was woken up by this woman screaming. She was hysterical. She was frantic. All I could remember was she was crying and she kept saying, "He's not breathing. Please help me. I don't know what to do." And initially, I thought it was my next door neighbors playing their radio really loud because they were known to have loud parties. So I was more annoyed than anything. I really just wanted to go back to sleep. But I kept hearing this lady crying and repeatedly saying somebody couldn't breathe, somebody wasn't breathing. Then I started to see police lights. And I thought, good, somebody called the cops on them and they're going to shut this thing down, whatever it is, because it was really annoying. I really just wanted to go back to sleep. And it probably went on for a few minutes and then it just stopped. But before it stopped, I realized that it wasn't a radio only because I didn't hear music. I just kept hearing this woman screaming and crying. And like I said, it just stopped. And so I thought, okay, good. Whatever it was, it's over. I can go back to sleep. So I was trying to go back to sleep, and all of a sudden, I hear footsteps. And the closest thing that it resembled was heels hitting the floor. I distinctly heard footsteps, like heels, you know, hitting like linoleum floor. So I was like, "Okay." I again, I'm trying to go back to sleep, but I keep hearing these footsteps, and so I was wide awake at that point, listening to these footsteps, and the footsteps were coming and going. They were entering the room, leaving the room, entering, leaving, and at one point, the footsteps stopped at the door. And so I was like, "Okay, I don't know what's going on, but I probably should see who it is," right? Because whoever it is, clearly they're checking on us. And I was expecting to see somebody. I was expecting to see either my mom or my stepdad. They were the only 2 adults in the house. So at one point, the footsteps got really close. Remember, my back was turned towards the door. So I'm hearing the footsteps get closer, and at the point where it got close and it stopped right behind me, I turned around and nobody was there. This is when I freaked out and I pulled the covers over my head. And I remember being really scared and just, you know, I was reciting the Lord's Prayer and eventually I did fall back asleep.
Oh, I didn't know this part about the story, even though you've told it to us several times. So your back was turned away from the door,
Uh-huh.
and did you hear the footsteps coming to the door, like stopping outside the door, or they were actually coming in the room?
Both. The footsteps were coming and going. And it was so close. At one point, it got really close. Like I said, I was expecting to see somebody when I turned around because the footsteps were really that close to me. I imagine if I had turned around, I would see somebody standing over me. That's how that's how clear the footsteps were. And so the next morning, I went to my mom and I was asking her, like, "Hey, were you walking around in high heels?" Remember, I was in the 3rd grade. I was, 8, 9 years old, trying to process everything that went on the previous night. And so I asked her, "Were you walking around in high heels last night?" And she gave me this weird look and she was like, "No, why?" And I go, "Okay." And so I told her the story. I told her about the lady crying. I told her about the police lights that I saw, and I told her about the footsteps, and that's what I could, you know, that was the closest thing that I could relate the footsteps to, high heels. So I asked her, "Were you walking around in high heels?" And she was like, "No, I wasn't walking around in high heels. Why would I be doing that at that time?" So we never brought it up again until, like, years later as an adult. I brought up that same story to her, and
So in this same story, what happened to the part where you said that you turned towards the door and someone was smiling, like they were checking on you?
well, that's the second story that I was gonna tell.
Oh, what?
So the second experience that I had in that house was one night, I was in my room, and I was trying to go to sleep, and I look at the door and I see this man's face. It's half a face, and I didn't recognize him right off the bat because the only man in the house at the time was my stepdad, and I knew it wasn't him. It didn't look like him. I could see this man's face, half his face, staring at me, smiling.
And was it a creepy smile? Was it kinda like a menacing smile?
It
How did
wasn't any of that. In fact, I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel scared. And the only thing that kept going through my mind at the time was, why is he just smiling at me? Why isn't he saying anything? I wasn't afraid. I didn't feel um, scared at all. Like I said, that's all I kept wondering was, I see this man smiling, but why isn't he saying anything?
So when you were telling the story when I was younger, you said it was like someone kinda just peeking into your room checking on you, right?
It kind of felt that way, but I mean, he was there for a good minute. Like, I think until I fell asleep. Yeah. So that after that, years and years down the road, I want to say in my late 30s, I bring up these stories to my mom and I'm like, "Hey, remember that house that we lived in and I had that experience?" And she told me that my sister, your auntie Edfel, had similar experiences. My younger sister, Belle, she was a baby at the time when we were living in that house. And my mom said that she would see my sister just pointing at thin air and laughing like somebody was playing with her.
Mhm.
But there was nobody there. And so after I came to her with my stories, she approached the owner of the house, the landlady, and she was told the landlady like, "Hey, my daughters are having these experiences in the house, what's the deal? What's the background of the house? Did anything happen there?" And so the landlady was like, "My husband died in the house. He died of a heart attack. In fact, in the master bedroom." And so
Mm-mm.
that gave me goosebumps all over when I heard that part. And, so my mom told her like, "Oh yeah, my older daughter was telling me about this face that she saw." And, the landlady was like, "Yep, that's most likely my husband, and I can understand why he showed himself to her because our daughter was the same age as your daughter
When he passed away?
when he passed away."
And wasn't he a doctor? Didn't you say he was a doctor?
He was a doctor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, hearing that story when I was younger, there are definitely many nights over the years where I think about that when I'm going to sleep, and I make sure my closet and my bedroom door is closed because I don't wanna wake up and the only person's face I wanna see at night or when I wake up is DJ's face. Oh my
Yeah, and I
goodness.
think the paranormal is one of those things where if you've never had a paranormal experience, you will most likely be a skeptic, you know? That's how your dad is, he's never had a paranormal experience, so he's a
Mhm.
full-on skeptic. He doesn't believe.
Yeah.
And I think had I not had those experiences, I most likely I mean, because you know that saying, "Seeing is believing."
Mhm.
So, of course, for me, if I can't see it or if I've never experienced it, then I I'll, I mean, I would take it with a grain of salt. Like, "Okay, sure, you had that experience." But I've had firsthand experiences, and
Mhm.
I am a believer. I believe that there is another dimension. I don't know what that is. There is something other than the physical realm that we can see and touch.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I've ever had a paranormal experience, and I used to wrestle with this because well, definitely when I was younger, I used to think, "Oh my gosh, I wanna see a ghost so bad." As I'm getting older, I don't wanna see a ghost. But then again, it's like, how do you really know if you've seen a ghost? I think sometimes you can't tell, but then again, because paranormal experiences are so characterized by the energy,
Mhm.
because it takes a lot for a spirit to manifest itself because the energy just shifts when people have paranormal experiences. I think you can definitely tell if, you're kind of like, oh, that situation was a little weird. That might not have been a human. But yeah, I mean, I think so too. And you have a gift. I think it's I mean, I know a lot of people are skeptical and, definitely try to explain this kind of stuff away with science and all that stuff. But when it keeps happening and it can't be a coincidence anymore. There's just some things you can't explain.
Yeah. Well, and I think, that too, if you wanna see it so bad, sometimes it doesn't manifest,
Mhm.
And I think kids are more sensitive
Yeah.
to that kinda stuff, so I think and that's why you hear a lot of stories where, kids are able to see ghosts, and I think to some extent, as you get older, that ability gets suppressed. It doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily go away, but I think, as adults, we tend to not pay attention. And then we end up
Yeah.
making excuses like, "Oh, it was just the
Mhm.
wind. It was just this weird anomaly." It can be
Yeah.
explained. We
Yeah.
don't really give it, a lot of thought.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think definitely, I mean, how many shows, how many stories have we watched and heard about kids specifically having paranormal experiences? And I think it's because kids are still so impressionable
Mhm.
and less judgmental. Obviously, when we're adults, like you said, we like to explain things away. We're a little bit more knowledgeable. So, I mean, like you said, it's easier to kind of explain things away.
Yeah. So the third story that I wanna talk about is, an experience that it's not on the paranormal side, but it's really weird. So, we were on our way to, my aunt's house, and so, we're in our family vehicle. My stepdad is driving, my mom's in the passenger seat, kids are in the back, and so we're driving down the road. So we make this left turn off of this road, and then we're gonna make a right, and then another left. On that last left, on that third left, would be where my aunt's house was. So we turn left, we make this right. Before we make that left to my aunt's house, my head started hurting. And I mean like full on migraine. And it was irritating, but for some reason, I just kept massaging my temple. I was just trying to get rid of the pain, and I close my eyes and I see my aunt's house. I see my aunt's house and I see this black and white vehicle across the street from my aunt's house. And the black and white vehicle belonged to my brother's friend. And I'm not going to say his name, but it belonged to his friend. And so I see my aunt's house, I see that friend's car, and I open my eyes and my headache is gone. So I'm like, okay, we make that left turn driving down the road to my aunt's house, and it's like a few houses down. And as we get closer, what do I see? I see my aunt's house and I see the black and white car exactly as I saw it just a few seconds ago. And I got so excited. I was like, oh my God, I saw this. I saw this in my head. And of course, your Uncle Richard was like, "What the hell are you talking about? You know, what do you mean you saw this?" And I'm like, "Never mind, nothing, no."
Mhm.
But I was like, "Wow, that's never happened again." That was the only time that ever happened. So I don't know what that was. I don't know if that was some untapped gift I happened to tap into at that moment in time, but it never happened again.
Okay. Okay, so this one, whenever you would tell this one when we were younger, I feel like this one could definitely not to invalidate the story at all, okay? Because I do believe in gifts and I think you have a gift. But I feel like this one, if someone else heard it, they could definitely try to explain it away and be like, okay, well, that's probably not the first time you've been to your aunt's house. And if it's your brother's friend, do they live close by or have they been before? Were they friends with your family? So if someone were to kind of question that story and bring those points up, what would you say to that? Did Uncle Richard's friend live close to your aunt?
No, actually, no, he did not. He
Okay.
lived closer to us.
And give some context.
When this
Okay.
happened, we lived in the Barragata house, and When we lived in the Barrigada house, I believe I was already in middle school.
Okay.
Yeah. And that friend lived closer to us when we lived in the Barrigada house. The Barrigada house was the house on top of the hill, close
Mhm.
to the airport. And yeah. So let's say I was like maybe 12, 13 years old.
Mhm.
Uncle Richard was 15,
Yeah, 15,
right?
16. Yeah.
Kids back then, they were able to drive at such a young age. I mean, I had my first car, and I probably should be saying this right now, but I didn't even have a driver's license. I had my driver's permit and I was driving around with my car.
Kids on
Times
Guam
were
were
different back
different.
then.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Okay, and did you guys know the friend was gonna be there?
no. Well, I didn't. I would not have any reason to even be
Right, because
interested in why the friend would be there.
yeah, because
It was
Uncle Richard's
just
friend, not your friend, yeah.
And yeah, it was just a really strange occurrence, and I still can't explain it, till this day. Like, what happened? How was I able to view that,
Mm.
So no, he did not
Okay,
live
yeah.
close to my aunt's house.
Okay. Been there before.
He had been there before because they were all
Okay.
friends. And my cousin, who is my aunt's son, they were all close friends.
Mhm.
So, yeah, he wasn't a stranger. Like, it wasn't abnormal for him to be there. He's been there before. They're friends. They hang out all the time. So it was perfectly normal for him to be there.
Yeah.
And yes, I have been to my aunt's house many times, so I knew exactly what my aunt's house looked like. But I think the strange occurrence was my head hurting, me closing my eyes, and then seeing my aunt's house, his car parked across the street, and then seeing it exactly just that,
Yeah.
when we made that turn.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So if it was a psychic vision and you've never had another one of those ever after that?
Yeah, that was the only time.
Oh my gosh.
That was the only time.
That's crazy. Because I think stories of the paranormal are I think people are a little bit more inclined to believe, but I know people are super, super skeptical of psychics, and
I am.
I love stories. Well, okay, that's justified because Sylvia Brown, there are some liars out there. But I love those stories of psychics who can see something that happened and can, like, help out the police. Like, there was this episode of well, actually, there have been several episodes of Unsolved Mysteries that I've watched where they focus in on psychics who have, never heard about a case, but then they start seeing things, they start
Mhm,
seeing how a crime happened. A lot of times, of course, it's a murder.
mhm,
They for some reason see how like, there was this one story on Unsolved Mysteries. This nurse in California was murdered, and her murderer disposed of her body up in the hills somewhere. And then this random lady, she started having this vision. She started seeing the body of a woman. She started seeing her shoes, what she was wearing. And so she and her daughter one day just they went up to the location, to the general area of where, her dreams and her visions were leading her. And sure enough, they discovered the dead woman's body. And so, of course, they called the cops, and the cops ended up thinking that she had some involvement in it because she knew exactly where the body was, but of course, she didn't. She had no idea who she was. She just had a gift.
yeah.
So, I find those really interesting, and I don't know what it was, but that would've been so cool if you continued to have those visions.
Yeah, it would have
The
been.
universe wasn't ready for that. The world was not ready for you to A, be able to see spirits, and B, be psychic. They weren't ready for that.
Yeah,
So, but
that
you
would
have
have been
so
a
many
very
m
interesting gift.
yeah, and you have so many more stories. Yeah. Like I said, you have so many more stories that you can tell that could probably be, my gosh, part 2, part 3 of this. We could make a whole series out of this. But all right, that wraps up tonight's episode. Thank you guys for spending time with us. Like I said, this is our first episode of this podcast that we're making. We We're very close. My mom and I, we love all things true crime. Obviously, we love the paranormal, everything mysterious. We do want to dive into love stories, legends, stories of culture. My mom is Filipino, my dad is Chamorro, so we definitely want to dive more into Chamorro and Filipino legends, different stories from different countries. We want to cover it all. We want to do it all. So that's kind of how this podcast is going to run. Every week it's going to be something different, whether it's paranormal, whether it's an unsolved mystery, whether it's a true crime story. We want to talk about it all because it's what we like to consume. This is something that we have in common. And I attribute it to the days where my mom was watching Snapped on Oxygen, okay, and Forensic Files, because that's what got me into true crime. So thank you guys for joining us. Please comment, please like this video, and give us feedback. We're just getting started. There are a million ways we can improve. Let us know how you're liking the episodes as we continue to post. And thank you guys for tuning in.